my purpose is to transform the quality of the rest of your life before 4:30. How many of you have to work with other human beings? And I'm just curious, do any of you have other human beings who sometimes get on your nerves? Anybody? Of course, it's no one in the room. I want to be clear about that. But sometimes there are people who are difficult for us. And in that difficulty, we get uncomfortable, and we make negative judgments, and we respond in some ways unconsciously, and we also are confused. Isn't it true that you're confused about why those people are the way they are? But we also make assumptions about why they are the way they are, and we act on those assumptions. And it can create all kinds of problems. There's a government agency that became under the guidelines for EEO. They hadn't been before. And all of a sudden there was all these EEO complaints. And we were called to come in and do some investigation and some support. And what we discovered is that really most of these people had worked together for 20 years. And that a lot of the challenges were really not because of the EEO complaints, but it was mainly more about personality conflicts and difficulties in working with others. And in doing that, we learned a lot of great examples. Like there was one supervisor who was absolutely convinced that his manager did not respect him and did not feel valued by this manager and felt there was discrimination issues. And in talking with him, what we found out is that it began 3 years ago. Now, I'm always fascinated when someone knows when it began, because that means something happened. Before then, it was okay. After then, so something happened. And what was it that happened? The normal course of the work is the supervisor would send work orders to the manager to sign off, and the manager signed off on them. But one day, the manager showed up at the job, something he'd never done before. And he looked at the work, and he left. He didn't say anything. And the supervisor was certain that this meant that the manager did not value what he did, he didn't respect him, and he was hurt and angry. And in talking with him, I said, well, I know this happened 3 years ago. I said, but fortunately, you weren't upset every day. He said, oh, no, every day. For 3 years. And I said, I'm curious, do other people know about your concern? Oh, yeah, everybody knows. And so here was a supervisor who had a kind of problem with a manager and was actually reinforcing a pretty negative opinion about the manager. What we found out from the manager is that he didn't have any memory at all about what was happening. And in talking with the supervisor, we've created a kind of safe environment where they could begin talking about it. We have a little process called the 6 stages in reaching an agreement. And the first stage is just, I understand you. And whoever's in authority is always the person who needs to be understanding first. And so the manager was going through this understanding process, listening to the supervisor say what had happened. And then the second stage is acknowledging any common ground. So he went back over and said, now that you say it, I do remember, I do get these work orders, I do sign them off, and yes, you're right. There was a time when I came down and looked at, you were making a door frame, weren't you fixing a door frame? I said, yes. And he said, you're right about all of that, and I can certainly see why, when I didn't say anything, why you could interpret that negatively and have made judgments about my behavior and even my attitude and my opinion about you. The third step is where now the manager gets to communicate and where the supervisor is to understand. And so he got to say some things, the manager did, that the supervisor didn't know. He said, for instance, I realized when I'm signing off on all these things, I didn't know what it was you were doing. And I'm just signing off like I'm supposed to know, and I don't. And I came down to see. And I was so impressed. I thought you did such an incredibly good job. I really had nothing to say. And in hindsight, I realized what a terrible mistake that was. To have not let you know I was coming, to have come and said nothing, and then to have left saying nothing, and here you left with this very negative, understandable experience when, in fact, my experience was very, very positive. Now, what do you think the supervisor's response was? Did he believe it? It was a hard one because looking at the manager, he actually in that moment believed that the manager was sincere. They'd known each other 20 years. But he'd spent 3 years convinced of a negative point of view. So he couldn't just let that go. But what it did do is it opened up the doorway for a new possible relationship where they could begin to build in a new direction. And this is just kind of a little example that I'm wanting to give you so that you can begin to see that it's possible to recognize something that I think is unconscious and automatic for almost all of us. We have this habit of someone says or does something that we don't like. And we feel uncomfortable. There's something in us that goes, ugh. And then we have this habit of immediately making a negative judgment. I mean, if I'm uncomfortable, there must be something wrong. And if somebody else is involved, then what's our judgment about them? They're wrong. But we go farther than that. We also make an assumption about what it would mean if I behaved that way. We interpret other people's behavior in light of our own. And so when we do that, we often make the decision, well, if they do this negative thing, they must be doing it on purpose. And then we take it personally. And it's a habit. And then we tend to react unconsciously and habitually, and we do it repeatedly. We do it in many ways that people have very little awareness of. Another thing that's important to understand about all of us as human beings is that we all have emotion. And it follows this little model. Our thoughts influence how we're feeling. Our feelings influence how we're behaving. Our behavior produces results. And there are basically two types of thoughts. There's either positive thoughts or negative thoughts. Your negative thoughts produce negative emotion. Your negative emotion produces negative behavior. Your negative behavior produces what I call ineffective results. And conversely, positive thoughts produce positive emotion, produce positive behavior, produce effective results. You don't get a negative emotion from a positive thought. And this is true about everybody. And having this insight is going to be powerful for you in dealing with the confusion about why people behave the way they do. For instance, one thing that's true about all of us is that we use the intensity of our emotion as evidence of the truth of our thinking. Isn't that true? The more upset I am, the more right I am. And the more I think about it, the more upset I get. And the more other people had better know it. We do this automatically, unconsciously. It's just not true. We also have a habit of thinking that whatever we think, whether it's positive or negative, we think we're right about it. Is there anyone here who does not know that you always think you're right? Come on. I'm saying you always think you're right. Some of you are admitting to it. Isn't it true that 95% of all your stress would be over like that if everyone would just realize that you're right? You know, this person who does this thing or says something you don't like and you tell them it's just not right to do or say that, and they go, oh, thank you for pointing that out. I don't know what got into me. Is that going to happen? No. But isn't it true that even when you think you're wrong, you think you're right that you're wrong? I mean, haven't you ever been in a meeting and you had an idea, and then you think, oh, no, that's probably not a good idea. So you don't think to say it. You don't actually say it because you've decided it's not right, it's wrong. And someone else, a few minutes later, could you hold up the angle? Comes up with exactly the same idea, and everybody goes, bravo, what a great idea. And we go, oh, I thought of that too. See, here we had an idea. We thought we were right about it, when in fact, we thought we were wrong, and we thought we were right that we were wrong. When in reality, we were actually right about it, and when we thought we were right that we were wrong, we were actually wrong about that, because we actually were right. Did y'all follow that?